Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the Dairy Signal. If you are looking at a screen or if you even meandered your way onto this episode, you're probably noticing, oh my gosh, it is a new website. We got a facelift here as we're heading into July. And so I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows some of those key functions that you're probably thinking, well, where did they go? They still exist. They're just in a little bit different of a spot. So, for example, if you are somebody who's joining us and loves to ask questions, which I hope you do, we absolutely love it on the Dairy Signal when you're able to ask your questions and interact with our presenters here. So, make sure you can do so. If you are on your video screen to the bottom right hand corner, you're going to see that there's three little dots. If you click on those dots, you'll see a couple different options. One will be able to ask questions. There also is another option to download. So if you are somebody who likes to listen or maybe watch the episode after the fact and you're maybe the tractor in the middle of nowhere with no internet and you have a tendency to download the episodes, that is also where you can find that option. So those are your two main options for during the presentation and what we're talking about in discussion here this afternoon. But if you're also somebody who is looking to get some continuing education credits, you could just wait until the end of the episode. And at the end of the episode, a quiz will automatically pop up, which is absolutely fantastic. And from there, you can submit your questions, or not your questions, excuse me. You can submit your quiz. But one important factor that I want to make sure to reiterate and have you all hear is that once you click complete, you have to hit the next button that shows up above it that says submit. And that's an important factor. Otherwise, you will not get your continuing education credit. So it's one more button push than you're probably used to before, but it'll automatically pop up at the end of the episode. And say that you're somebody who maybe has to come through it once or twice and are coming through and you're trying to get that quiz complete. If you're looking for it in the middle of the episode, if you go to the top left-hand portion of your video screen, you'll see a little hamburger menu option. And that is another place where you can click take quiz at any moment in time. But with all of that being said, I know that is a lot of housekeeping, and I have one more area of housekeeping before we dive into today's episode because I know it is going to be one that people are waiting for on pins and needles because heifers and replacements are a huge topic of discussion here in the dairy sector. But in order to make sure that episodes like the Dairy Signal and like this one continue, we have to say a huge thank you to our sponsor currently for the Dairy Signal, which is your checkoff program, DMI. So your dairy checkoff is at work building sales and the trust of dairy through restaurant, retail, and food service partners and youth outreach through also youth outreach, research, and product development, and more. You can visit dairycheckoff.com to learn more about how they're making every drop count. So, huge thank you to DMI for their support of our organization. But let's dive into why we are here this afternoon, and that is to talk about being smart with our replacements and our heifers that we all know are incredibly important, especially with the way prices are these day and age. So, with that being said, I am going to have JP Martins, who is the assistant professor in the Department of Medical Sciences at the UW-Madison School of Veterinary Medicine, give himself a little bit of an introduction here this afternoon. So, JP, take it away. We're excited to have you on here today.
Yeah, thanks for the invite and for having me on this episode. So, I'm a Brazilian veterinarian. I'm a professor here at the School of Vet Med. I did my master and PhD in dairy cattle reproduction at Michigan State University with Dr. Richard Pursley. So I did a lot of studies, large studies with synchronization programs, especially with cows, a little bit of heifers before I came here, and I had a feeling that heifers would be the next step because a lot of producers, they focus on the cows and they forget a little bit about the heifers. And of course, they are as important as the cows because they're the next generation of the cows that we're going to have in the farm, right? So my studies right now, I'm focusing on heifers and of course a little bit of also on pregnancy losses and in dairy cows as well.
So,
So
I was just going to say, we're excited to have you on because you've got a wide array of expertise here, but like I said, an area that's incredibly important. So I do want to say a reminder real quick before we jump into the slides. Again, folks, if you're watching live, ask your questions. If you have any moments where you're wondering what is going on, just hit those bottom three dots in the right-hand corner, and that's where you can ask your questions for today's episode. But with that, JP, I'm going to let you get started and get going on all of the good information we're here for.
So one of the first questions is why is it important to optimize reproductive performance in dairy heifers, right? So this is something that's happening lately in the dairy sector here in the US. So I have here a slide that shows the US dairy heifer replacement inventory. And you can see that from 2000 to 2016, and for the folks that are not seeing the slide, I can tell. So we started with 4 million head of dairy heifer replacement in 2000, went all the way up to about 4.8 millions of dairy replacement. And of course, most likely this was due to increased use of sex semen during this period, and also because of a lot of the reproductive performance increase due to the advancements in technology like synchronization programs for lactating dairy cows, such as OVSync, double OVSync, pre-sync, off-sync, all those programs that really improve. We call them now fertility programs because they really improve fertility of lactating dairy cows. And then besides that, there's a lot of sex semen being used more and more, even in the cows. So the dairy replacement half an inventory increased quite a lot compared to what we had in 2000. But then after 2016, we have a decrease on that heifer replacement inventory from going back from that 4.8 million to almost the same as what we have in 2000 to the 4 million head. And most likely that was due to increased use of beef semen. And right now, with the the cross beef and dairy calves that we have, price being escalating like to close to 1300 day old calf, of course, people are going to use more and more beef semen, which that makes alarming. It makes a little bit on of alarming side that you have to make sure you do a really good job on calculating your heifer replacements, right? Making sure you have, because the cost of the heifer replacement is increasing with that decrease in the inventory, right? So that's one of the things why you have to be careful and making sure you're doing a really good job with the reproduction of heifers. And this is just another slide to show what we are like the increase of sex semen in dairy heifers. So this study was conducted here at UW-Madison, data from DRMS. Dr. Paul Frick and his team here, they evaluated more than 9,000 herds, more than a million, and 100,000 Holstein heifers to see what people are using as sex or conventional Holstein semen or Holstein sexed or beef semen. So another dairy, very small amount. So most of the producers in the first, second, and first, second service are using sex semen in these animals, about close to 50%. This is like 2019, 2020, and 2021. You see there's a trend for increasing the use of sex semen, getting to close to almost 60% for first service, about 50% for second service, and a little bit lower for third service with sex semen. And the amount of beef semen being used, even in heifers, is increasing. Most of these producers are using over third or over third service beef semen in these animals. So I have a data set here that actually with 42 Wisconsin producers, and we haven't had time to analyze everything, but we have about 11 dairies that we were able to evaluate, and you can see that most of the heifers are inseminated. About 82% of them are being inseminated with sex semen, and just about 8% with conventional semen, and about 8% with beef semen. there's a small percentage of heifers being even inseminated or using natural service with bulls, which is something that I would not recommend. The bull service doesn't improve the fertility. It's not doesn't have any improved fertility comparing to this semen purchase, like the frozen semen purchase in AI companies. So, and when we separated those services, okay, we see that first and second service are very similar to the one that we saw, but almost 100% of those are being inseminated of these heifers are being inseminated with sex semen. So sex semen is being used very, very, very. The use of sex semen is really, really high on those animals, especially in first, second service, and we still use in third and third plus services, but it decreases. Okay, so that's a very common management practice nowadays. And of course, since the heifers are going to be usually have a higher net merit and better genomic, so since they are next generation of your farm, so using the animals to these animals to replace and actually to have the offspring for the next generation would be the recommended thing to do. Some people will use genomics to select the best animals to actually even increase even more the use of beef semen in this case. Okay, so a lot of producers are not even using conventional semen anymore.
So, JP,
Yeah.
before we go from there, and maybe this is something we'll dive more into, so please tell me to hold my horses if we will.
Oh, go
But
ahead.
we had a question come through, and I think it's a great time to talk about it. That reads, how has the use of sex semen impacted the age of calving in for heifers? And I think that's a great question. Because, and I know we'll get into a whole bunch more of factors and scenario types
So the
later.
question was how the sex semen affect the age at first calving, you said? Age of first
Yes.
calving?
Yep.
So the the problem with sex semen it is that we have a little bit of a lower conception on those. Okay, I believe that's what the question was about. Okay, so if you have a lower conception, it will take a little bit longer for these animals to get pregnant. Okay, but of course you're going to have only heifers out of those animals, right? Or 90%. Actually, it's about 90%, 10% of bull calves that you're going to have, even using sex semen. It's not 100%. You still have a small percentage of bulls, but you're going to have a decrease. And that's one of the reasons why you have to watch also when you're using sex semen. You have to do everything really, really, really well in terms of handling the semen, inseminate it correctly on the right timing, making sure the heifer's in heat or using a very precise or good synchronization program for your heifers. And that's the basically the next step of my presentation is sex semen. Oh, let me see if I can change here gets a little about 80 to 85% of conception rate what the conventional semen will have. It. So if you, for instance, have about 56% conception rate on animals using conventional semen, with sex semen you get about 47% conception rate. There's a lot of it. The technology has improved, but even though with that improved technology, we still see this decrease in conception rate. The semen seems to be the process of separating the semen it's a little bit detrimental for that semen. So it takes time, and as the process goes, the semen goes through that process. The semen actually you have more damage of the semen, and actually the conception rates of that decrease. It seems like I believe it's because the semen cannot handle longer period of time in the tract as the conventional semen can hold. So you have to be very careful about timing of insemination. Okay, it seems like with conventional, the semen, it's a little bit more, the livability of that semen, survivability of that semen is a little bit longer, basically. All right. I'm not sure about fertilization and stuff like that if it changes. Okay. I haven't seen studies on that, but it probably even fertilization rates probably even are decreased. I'm not 100% sure on that. But you can see that all of those services have decreased conception rates. So that's another thing. Since we're using more and more sex semen, we have to be careful. We have to make sure we inseminate those animals on the right timing and We also have to use the best program that we can have on those animals. Okay, so if you wait too long for watching that animal, let's say you have a voluntary waiting period of 13 months and you just watch for heats, and let's say you miss one of the heats for these animals, okay, and it's already about or one or two heats of that animal, it's about 15, 16 months, and then you inseminate that animal doesn't become pregnant. So you are just based on heat detection. Sometimes that can have a problem if you have lower conception rates in the semen too. So it's going to take longer and longer for that animal to become pregnant. So this is one of the studies. Another study, same thing. In this particular study, we have it's a randomized control study. So they actually got animals, same heifers from one particular herd, and they randomly assign heifers to receive conventional or sex sorted semen. And that's really hard study to do right nowadays because people don't want you to actually randomize conventional sex semen right now. So most producers will want to have that control. They want to choose which cows receive sex or conventional semen. In this particular study, they actually chose they just randomly assign heifers to receive conventional sex semen, and we can see that the conception rates of the sex semen was lower, and actually even pregnancy losses was a little higher. So we have to be a little careful with that too. And of course, you can see here in this particular study they did with cows, so it's a little bit higher losses there, as you can see. So this is basically what our conception rates from the same data that I have, the data set that I have. The most of the producers are using conventional semen from those 11 herds, almost 22,000 services, and we're getting about 56% conception rate on that first service, which is pretty good. Actually, this is what I would recommend. About the benchmark would be about that, about 55, 56% conception rate. And you can see that the conventional sim in this case has very small numbers, so we're probably gonna be confounded by other factors here. Okay, but you can see that on the other services, you can see that that changes because the conventional semen seems like to be a little better. Actually, it's better than the sex semen, even and the beef semen, same thing. Oops,
Oh,
sorry.
oh, no, you're good. So JP, I don't know if I'm well, perfect. I was just going to ask, when we're talking about breeding heifers, what are some of the biggest areas that come into cost aside from feed? Because I know feed is generally what's the first thing people look at, but let's talk about some of those other costs.
Yeah, so what are what is the cost first of rearing a heifer? A lot of producers don't know how much they are paying. They have a ballpark number, but they did a study in New York, north east of United States, where they actually calculated all the costs from 11 or no, sorry, from 19 producers, and they got to a cost of almost $2,400 from birth of that heifer until actually calving. So until that heifer gets to being a lactating a dairy cow, it takes about $2,400 to raise that animal. So it's quite costly. But of course, nowadays, I talked to a producer a couple days ago, and he told me that they're selling between $3,000 and $4,000 a heifer. So it's worth it now to raise those animals since the cost is about that. Of course, you're gonna have variation on that cost, but the mean of that, the average of that costs about 2,400. And of course, there are several things that they took in consideration. Here's a little bit of uh, the the math, the equation, or the different costs that these animals have to grow. So you can see that feed would be the main one, as cows, of course, about 46% of that cost would be only on feed. And here about 13% on labor. And those are the two biggest costs. 13% is labor, and the rest you would divide in different things like bedding, maternity pen, management, health, the breeding of the animal, insurance, trucking, machinery, facility, manure to just manage that manure. So you can see that's there's some differences there, but the major ones here would be probably that facility, as you can see, custom boarding and interest of daily investment. So you have those costs divided almost across the entire all different things that you can see here. But labor and feed would be the main ones. So if you think about it, days on feed here, that would be what it would be the main thing that we can manage to reduce. The rest is pretty hard to reduce in terms of it would be very fixed, right? But the feed would be the only one. If you take more time to raise that animal, you would actually have more. The cost of that raising that heifer would be higher, and if you decrease the time to raise that animal, you would actually reduce the cost of raising that animal. So, and one of the issues though is 46% it's feeding. So the problem is that how can you reduce that time? All right. So if you divide, and then they did this graph that's pretty cool. So they actually calculated the amount of dollars per day and per pound for each of those weeks from zero since that animal was born until she actually calved. And you can see that the cost is higher, of course, when you're bottle feeding that animal during the pre-weaning period, right? Then after the weaning period, and the pre-breeding period, that animal is very steady. The cost of the animal per day, there's not a lot of variation. During that breeding period, it's a little bit higher because you're going to increase the breeding of that animal, right? You're going to have some labor um, cost included in this, and then you're going to have the gestation period. And that animal, the cost of the animal is going to increase right prior to breeding. When you actually get that animal for the close-up band, close to that, you're going to have higher costs with the feeding of that animal, right? And of course, labor too. So, can we change gestation period? No, we don't want to do that. You can have issues when you actually reduce gestation period, inducing those animals. You're going to have more retained placenta, metritis, and different problems. Can you reduce the pre-weaning? Uh, Most likely not. No, you're going to have issues here too. Post-weaning period, the same kind of thing. If you reduce too much, you're going to have issues with production. So the idea that I recognize is actually to being very aggressive on your breeding period. So reducing the time for that animal to get pregnant after you establish what is the voluntary waiting period of that animal. Okay. And we're gonna talk about that too. So when you establish, okay, this is the time that I wanted to start breeding animals in my farm at my farm, I'm gonna do really, really well on getting that pregnant animal pregnant really quick. It's like cows, right? When you get establish a voluntary waiting period to them, it's a race to get them pregnant, right? You want to really, really get them really pregnant quick. And of course, you're going to use different methods. There is synchronization that you use. You're going to use heat detection. So it's very similar. What I would say it needs to be done with heifers. After you establish that voluntary period, let's get these animals bred quick, put semen in them really quick. And after that, let's get them pregnant quick too. Okay. So this would be the main thing to do. And you can see here, this is a graph that producers are being very aggressive, especially in Wisconsin. You can see this is data from courtesy from Paul Freaky and Megan Lauber. They did get data from CDCB, and they showed here age of first calving. We've been very good on decreasing that to they recognized that would be about 22 to 24 months of age to get these animals to calve. And especially in Wisconsin here, we got these animals to have an average of 23.4 age of first calving in Wisconsin. It's a little bit lower than actually the rest. Illinois has a little bit higher, 24.6. The median for all the age of first calving from these data sets about 23.9 months. So producers are getting better on get these animals on the right time to calve on the right time. And this is hosting cows, by the way. So how can that impact milk production, the age of first calving, right? If you, and this is a data set from UK, so it might be a little different in terms of values, but it's very similar actually the trend of if you inseminate some animals too early, and that's an association though. No, there's no studies that I have seen that actually people randomize animals. Let's breed these animal a little bit later. This heifer, let's breed her with 14 months, and randomize and choose another one to breed her another heifer on 13 months and see what's the difference. So they haven't they haven't done a randomized control study on that. And we actually tried to get a grant on this, and we were not successful because I think this it's something that it's the next stage. Like, how can we be a little bit more proactive on finding the animals that we can breed early without affecting milk production later? Okay. And anyway, I'm going to show some data, and most of these data that we have on weight and production is going to be more association. So, and there's a lot of factors that needs to be considered when you have associations. There are confounding factors, okay? So it's not like a study that they actually select animals. Let's breed these animals right now. No, these animals that were bred earlier, they probably show estrus earlier and they were bred earlier. So they were probably more fertile animals. But they probably were not great producers as well. So they have higher reproduction but lower production. So as you can see here, they did a study. So they calculated the lifetime. They got records from almost 170,000 heifers from UK milking herds between 96 and 98, 1996 and 1998. And they got the age of first calving, and you can see that from 19 months all the way to 48 months, 49 months of age. And the peak for the lifetime production was actually 24 months of age for calving, for the first calving. Okay. So these animals that calve about 24 months had the highest lifetime milk production. Okay. And if you, and these animals that were inseminated or they got pregnant earlier and they calved early, they have a little bit lower production. Okay. Especially the ones that were really early. So if you if you are really aggressive on breeding animals on 19, 20 months, sorry, about 11 months, 10 months, you're probably going to have some detrimental effect on your milk production. Okay. But you can see here, after you have a steady decrease, the animals will slowly decrease the production if they get pregnant later. Okay. But getting them close to that 24 months, that's probably the key. Okay.
Well, JP, I'm just going to make a comment here that I appreciate you going through it and clarifying that it's not necessarily that we want to breed heifers earlier. We want to breed them within the right time frame from it sounds like. So they're calving in around that 24 months like they should, in order to maximize not only, their potential, but making sure that we're being cost effective as well. But what are some of the other considerations or factors or things we need to be thinking about when it comes to breeding our heifers?
Yeah, so one thing that I was gonna show this study from Paul also, that he divided the animals in different actually quartiles. So they actually it's a data set that is also association. So they got 7,000 lactating dairy cows from Northwest Iowa, and they actually got data from weights of these animals 30 days after they calve. Okay, so they've had the first calving, they weighed these animals, and with these data set, they actually divide those animals in quartiles based on their weight. And they retrospectively went back to when they were heifers and checked pregnancy per AI and PTA for different traits. And they also got milk production for those animals. And it's what is interesting is the data set they have, quite interesting, very, very interesting data set actually. So this is the body weight. They divide in quartile. They have light animals, moderated light animals, moderate and heavy animals here. So of course the lightest animals were the animals that were probably getting pregnant earlier and they were calving earlier. So they when they calved and they were weighed about 30 days in milk, they actually had about 120 1,130 pounds of weight, okay? And they had an average first calving about 22.5 months. The animals that were the heaviest, okay, they actually seems like they took longer to get pregnant and they actually calved about 23.15. So a little bit later, as you can see on their age of first calving. And the interesting thing too is that mature body weight, as you can see here, they actually went to this farm and they weighed these animals. So the right thing to do if you want to know what is the mature body weight of my animals, you have to weight your primiparous cows. Sorry, weight your third and fourth lactating cows. Okay, about 30 to 40 days in milk. Okay, and then you're gonna have your mature body weight because you have those animals that have achieved already a mature adult weight. So in this particular case, it was 1,510 pounds. Okay, so close to 1,500 pounds the weight of these animals. So you can see that when they calved, the ones that were the lightest ones, had about 75% mature body weight. The heaviest one had about 92% body weight. So how does these animals change in terms of reproduction and PTA? So the lightest ones were the ones that have the lowest PTA for milk production, okay, comparing to the heaviest one. So those animals had really low PTA for milk production comparing to the heaviest ones, and you can see the stature of these animals were also decreased comparing to the other ones. So those are animals that are smaller, and there are some data that show that those animals that are smaller, they most likely will have better reproduction. And that was the case. You can see the DPR for those animals were high, that was the highest comparing to the heaviest. So these animals actually had higher fertility comparing to the heaviest ones. So they weren't the ones that were getting pregnant really early. Okay. And when you can see the conception rates of those animals, 72% conception rates comparing to the heaviest ones that were 46, 40, close to 47%. So the question is, should we wait these animals to get heavier? That's a question. That's $1 million question. I don't know. This is an association. So, but I believe it would if they wait a little bit longer on these animals, if they had a weight of those animals and they knew that they were lower in their mature body weight when they inseminated, they could wait a little bit longer to get into the best mature body weight, which is the preconized one is 55% mature body weight. I think they could probably produce more milk. And that's here what is the cool thing about this data set too. So when they actually looked into production of these animals in the first 4 weeks of production when they were primiparous, the difference between the lightest and the heaviest was about 10 pounds. So in the fourth week, eighth week, 12th week. So these animals that were the lightest were producing, although they were the most most fertile animals, they were getting pregnant really early. They were not producing as much as the heaviest. So that's the question. Can we make these heaviest one? Can we reduce the voluntary waiting period of these animals based on weight, inseminate them earlier, and get them to produce the same thing, but earlier? And the ones that are lighter, can we wait a little bit longer and get them pregnant a little bit later to produce more milk? That's a question that we would want to do, and we want to do a study on that to just see, okay, because 10 pounds per day, it's a lot of milk to think about. It's a lot of milk, right? So, and I believe we would have a difference there. So there's another study that I can show that was done on heifers in California and Jersey heifers, and they actually did very similar thing with quartiles. Got a data set from a farm that had weights on those heifers, and they divide by quartiles, and the heifers that had lower there were smaller heifers, the lightest ones, below 480 pounds had the lowest production. Okay, it was not as significant as this other one, but they had about 4 to 5 pounds difference in production, the lightest ones comparing to the other groups. So it seems like weight would be a very important factor that needs to be in the calculation when you are actually selecting these animals to be eligible for insemination. So that's the bottom line. And the preconized mature body weight is 55%, and that's the take-home message. Insemination eligibility of heifers should be defined not only by age, but also by percentage of mature body weight to maximize the genetic potential for future milk production. Future first lactation performance should be evaluated after adopting management changes. So if you change that, you got to go back and evaluate uh, how much does that change affected your production, okay, and the reproduction as well. So keeping like having someone evaluating constantly this change is also something that I would recommend. So using a 55% mature body weight at first insemination, that would be a key. For height, we preconized about 90% of the height with their height. Okay, so those are mature body size benchmarks that we have that were established in the late 90s. Any
So
questions?
yes, JP, I do have a question that came in that pertains to where we're at right now. And I do want to mention to the other questions that are currently waiting. I'm not ignoring you. We're just going to hold those to the end because I think they have a little bit more complexity that we'll want to get into. So for the question I'm going to ask now, though, it reads, so for heavier conditioned heifers, should we maybe breed them to conventional to just get them pregnant at an earlier time?
That's a good question. And I think you gotta be careful there because if you first you gotta have an established percentage of animals that you want for percentage of number of heifers that you have, right? If you need, right, to replace those animals. So you don't want to be short on heifers since the price of heifers is extremely high right now. So making sure you know what is the percentage of heifers you have, right? And then using a conventional semen maybe would be a good strategy for those animals, okay? If you're using genomics on these herd in your herd, okay, you can select those animals that you want to use sex semen, and you can use conventional semen or even beef semen on those animals, which would be also a little bit higher conception rate. Okay, so this would be one of the ways of doing it. But if you're weighting them and you're seeing those animals are too heavy, maybe you want to reduce a little bit the time of insemination of those animals and get them pregnant earlier, especially if they are higher production animals, right? If they are animals that have really high genetic merit, you probably want your next generation of heifers coming from those animals as well. Okay. So it's a trade, right? If you use the conventional, you can get higher conception rate, but you're gonna have also some hosting calves out of that. So you gotta see what is the most important thing for you there. Okay. But if you want to get them pregnant earlier, I would probably reduce a little bit the timing or the time of insemination, the age of insemination, if they already reached that 55% mature body weight, and try it that way. If they don't get pregnant, if you see there is a difference on those animals, and you can use conventional semen too.
So I appreciate that because it sounds like there's a couple different factors to look at depending on your herd and what might work best. But the idea of getting them bred and pregnant can come from a couple different solutions for those maybe heavier heifers. So I'll let you keep
Exactly.
going on, but appreciate your answer to that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to have one exactly like you gotta, of course, I want to make sure I don't change too much your management strategy because sometimes those can affect a lot. So you got to make sure you have the replacement heifers that you need. That's the first thing that I would say. And second, you can change change a little bit your management based on those factors, especially if you recognize mature body weight, I think that would be probably the key, the first thing to go through. And then the second thing, if you actually reduce that time and you're seeing that's not making a difference on if it's making a difference on your conception rates, then you can use the conventional semen on those. All right, so how to reduce time to pregnancy and decrease their rearing period and associated costs. That's the second thing, and that's one thing that may be able to help you, that for the person that asked that question. So here is actually the conception rates that we have from this is data from 2006 from about almost that's a lot of inseminations. As you can see, 550,000 inseminations, 362,000 heifers, almost 3,000 herds, and you can see the average conception rates on those herds is 57%. There's a lot of variation, and I believe some of these is probably wrong. I'd never seen anybody having less than 20% conception rate in their herd, and some I've never seen anybody having over 80%. I've seen people having close to 70% on conception rate of heifers, but not over 80%. But average, it would be about 57% conception rate. So these data set that we had here from Wisconsin, from 42 herds between 2022, 2023, we had about average of 54% conception rate. As you can see, some people were struggling here, just maybe in one herd with lower than 40% conception rate. They could have an issue with, maybe they have an issue with their insemination there, or their breeding, and or even the way they're raising these animals. But you can see that most of them have over 45% conception rate, and some herds, a couple herds, maybe even higher than 5% conception rate. And most of those are using sex semen, you can see. But we haven't had a lot of improvements on conception rates in actually heifers since the 2006. In 20 years, you can see that we haven't had a lot of well, if you think about it, if most people are using sex semen, it has lower conception rate. Maybe there was a little bit of improvement, but it's still about 54% conception rate, right? Which is not bad. So what we have is insemination protocols, time day protocols for using dairy heifers. I don't see a lot of herds using this, and I think this is actually, it's sometimes complicated because of the facilities. I understand the struggle for a lot of the producers, but I think that's actually one of the technologies that could help a lot of producers. So time day eye, the same way that we're using with cows, it would be amazing if we could use time day eye in heifers, or even a combination of time day eye with estrus detection. And this is, I'm going to show you why. So here's a study by the Jose Santos group from Florida. They had almost 2,200 cows in this study in a single farm in Florida. They did different protocols with CIDRs, okay? And the highest conception rate was with the what we call the 5-day CIDR sync program, or co-sync program, which is a program that used CIDR for 5 days. Okay, got almost 60% conception rate on these animals being inseminated with conventional semen. So what is this protocol? So that is recognized by, actually recommended by the DCRC, the Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council. If you enter in the Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council, you can see different programs for producers, but this is a very common protocol that's used also in beef cows and heifers. You can see that you just give a GnRH, 5 days of CIDRs, prostaglandin 2 times, making sure you have a CL regression there, and a GnRH combined with insemination on that day 8 of the protocol. The issue with this protocol is that about 27 to 33% of the animals come in heat earlier. Okay, so you gotta watch for heats one day before. So this, between the last 2 injections, you have to watch for heats to make sure you breed at the right time, especially for those that are receiving sex semen. So what is the importance of this protocol? Can this protocol reduce the time to conception? Okay, that's the question. So they did actually a study comparing estrus detection, regular detection of estrus with tail chalk, okay, here in insemination once a day, and this protocol that I just showed, the 5-day co-sync protocol. Conventional sex semen, so a mix in 3 different herds in California, and they did for four, we call the 421-day cycle, so uh, until 84 days after these animals were eligible for insemination. So this is the pretty much we call a survival curve. It's the time that took these animals to get pregnant. So if you get these two protocols, what is the average days to conception, average days to get these animals pregnant? Okay. For the control group, you can see that it took almost 29 days for animals to get pregnant. And for the treatment group, the ones that we did with timed AI, it took about 19 days. So it's a reduction in 10 days to get these animals pregnant. All right. At the end of these 84 days, so at the end of this 21-day cycle, they got 85% of the animals pregnant with the regular estrus detection, comparing to 92% of the animals pregnant with the timed AI. So they did timed AI with that first insemination, and later on, they just checked for heats, okay, and preg check and insemination with heats and timed AI after that if they were open at the diagnosis of pregnancy. So you can see that the difference was right on this beginning of the protocol. So just because they inseminated all these animals in timed AI, they had a reduction on the days to conception to about 10 days. So how does that translate in cost? Okay, so that's the key of that. So they separated these costs based on hormonal treatment, detection of estrus, semen and AI, pregnancy diagnosis, extra feed, and so all these costs here were included in the total cost. And as you can see, the most cost for these programs actually was the extra fee. So the days on feed. Okay. So the additional cost for the hormonal for the hormones was actually not sufficient to surpass the extra days on feed that these animals took to get pregnant. So the total cost for per heifer in this protocol was $85, sorry, for the control with estrus detection and $76 for the timed AI. So between $9 and $10 per heifer, okay, that the program with timed AI reduced. So each heifer, they reduced about $10 using the timed AI program. And that's, I think, the key. So when you see in terms of cost per pregnancy, they did the same calculation per pregnancy and was about $17 of reduction in on the time they hide. So even though they have a higher cost for a hormonal treatment, they still need to check for heats after they inseminated these animals anyway, because they were rebreeding these animals based on heats. So the cost for detection was a little higher for the control, but for the time they eye was very similar here. The thing that made a difference was the time to get these animals pregnant. All right. So that's the key here. And I'm not going to show in terms of other, but there are not, this is not the only study. We have a study from a group in Cornell that did the same thing, and they showed very similar trend. They got actually quicker. These animals that were inseminated through with the time AI had a reduction in time to pregnancy. We have a study here from Wisconsin, from Wisconsin. We did the same thing, and actually we got a reduction in cost for getting these animals pregnant too. So it's being shown in different studies that using a program like that, we can get these animals pregnant quicker and reduce the cost for raising them. Okay, and getting them to a first lactation. The question is a lot of, and I'm not sure what is the major barrier for those producers to not use a timed AI. I'm not sure if it's labor. That's a question that I have for you as a producer. What is your barrier to get these animals inseminated or to use a timed AI protocol or synchronization protocol in heifers? And I'm not sure, Amber, what do you think would be? I don't know if it's labor, the facility, sometimes a difficulty to inseminate, to give the shots to those animals or to treat those animals with a CEDAR. We believe cedars or progesterone implants may be a problem. So in my lab, we are developing a program without cedars, without progesterone implants. I'm talking cedars because they are the only implants approved in the United States. We don't have other brands. So we developed a program actually that don't use progesterone implants. So those intravaginal implants sometimes take longer to actually insert them intravaginally. There's a problem with actually vaginitis as well. So we did a study that we actually implemented one more injection in this program. When we give that injection of prostaglandin or we call, a lot of producers know as lute shot. If you do a lute shot 2 days before, we have an increase in the response of the ovulatory response. So we have a better response for that program. And a lot of producers actually, producers that use these protocols are implementing these even with the cedar. Okay. But when we use the prostaglandin, that lute shot 2 days before, we have a higher response, ovulatory response for that first generation, and these animals seems to actually synchronize better. So in our study, we actually did a comparison between um, two protocols without the implant that we use the prostaglandin. And if you use that prostaglandin 2 days before, if you have a high ovulatory response, you pretty much most likely don't need that progesterone implant, okay, in the protocol. So we did this with a 5 day interval between and a 6 day interval between the GnRH and the prostaglandin at the end of the protocol. Okay. In this case, what was interesting about this study was that when we did this study here in Wisconsin, about 850 heifers. Age of insemination was a little bit young, so about 389 days when they were actually enrolled. So they got inseminated a little bit over, a little bit close to 400 days, at age. So we detect esters about 730 animals, and we only use sex semen. In that particular farm, since they inseminate a little bit early those animals, you can see an effect on conception rate. So you're going to have a little bit of a reduction in conception rate when you breed those animals to that early, okay? So here's the actually percentage of animals that showed estrus on that last 2 days of the protocol. We had about 77% to 84% of animals that showed estrus using this program, that the 5 and the 6 day program, and about 32 and 42% of those animals chose estrus a little earlier. So if you use this type of protocol without the intravaginal progesterone implant, you're gonna have more animals coming heat probably a little sooner. So if you have the cedar, you have a little bit a smaller percentage of animal showing heats here. So if you use this type of program, you're gonna have to implement estrus detection at the end here. So a lot of them ovulated. You can see most of them, almost 95% of them in one protocol, the other one 90%. So very good response at the end. We have very good ovulatory response at the, that's what we want, to ovulate that egg at the end of the protocol. Okay. You can see that some of them actually ovulated. This is ovulated earlier, a little bit earlier. So that's why we want to make sure we check those animals in heat. So it was a little bit higher for the 6 day. Okay. When we did the 6 day, we have a little bit higher ovulation a little bit earlier. So this is the conception rate, what matters. Okay. So we got about 45% with the 5 day, PG 5 day, and about 49% with the 6 day. And the 6 day was a little bit higher, most likely because we had a really good detection of heat, okay? And because, as you can see here, animals that showed estrus had higher conception rate. And this is with different studies, most studies will show the same thing. Animals that are synchronized, that show estrus, they have higher conception rates comparing to the ones that don't show estrus. And this is on heifers, okay? With lactating dairy cows, a different story. A different story. I don't want to enter in that topic, but in animals that show estrus, heifers at least, you're gonna see a little bit higher conception rate, and that's most likely why we had a little increase on conception rate for the 6 day. But you gotta make sure if you don't have a good estrus detection and you don't catch those animals, you're gonna have a lower conception rate because those animals will ovulate a little earlier. Okay. So just in summary, delaying the induction of luteolysis 1 day increased the proportion of heifers detecting estrus in this particular study. A greater proportion of heifers with the 6 day program were detecting estrus before that last GnRH and before the insemination that we had preconized 3 days after that lute shot. Heifers detecting esters had a greater conception rate, and the 6 day program seems to be a good alternative program for producers that do not want to use the progesterone implant in dairy heifers. If you're not checking for heats or not doing a good job on that last day, checking for heats on that last day, use the 5 day if you want to use a program that don't use progesterone implant. We are currently doing a study that compared these programs without the implant with the programs with implant. So let's see what we have. Most likely the progesterone implant helps, okay, with the synchronization there at the end, but you will reduce the cost of the hormonal treatment, okay. All right, so must do for heifers. Last message before we finish here. Quality over quantity. We want to make sure how many heifers we need. We want to make sure you have this calculation and you know exactly how many heifers you need, because if you're going to use, especially using sex semen and beef semen, you want to make sure you have enough heifers. And I would go a little bit over the correct, like you don't want to be tight on heifers since they're costing way more than what you, than the cost for raising them, right? So genomic selection would be a good strategy to make sure if you want to select the animals that are most the best producers, the animals that you want for at the next generation of in your farm. Determining mature body weight and programs that optimize growth and health of young heifers would be a key. So measuring growth of heifers to determine age, average daily gain of these heifers would be something that you could use. I know that most of dairies right now are actually raising heifers off the farm, so you want to make sure you have some kind of like way to determine if they're doing a good job with your heifers, right? Reduce the incidence of disease. Here in my group, we have a food animal production medicine group here at the School of Vet Med. So we have Dr. Terry Olivet that's specialized in calf health, and she does a lot of ultrasound, lung ultrasound to determine pneumonia, and she's been training a lot of veterinarians that are diagnosing pneumonia, and this is really really important to make sure you reduce the incidence of disease, making sure you know what is the correct incidence of the disease and how to reduce that. So this is gonna most likely affect the growth of these animals and actually how fertile they are too. Aggressive reproductive management. After doing all this, after making sure you precognize you have a established voluntary waiting period, you want to inseminate and get those animals pregnant as soon as possible. As soon as you get them into eligibility, since they're eligible to become pregnant, you want to make sure you do a really good job on being aggressive and in getting them pregnant. Very similar to cows. Okay, if you use the same strategy as you're doing with cows, you're going to be very successful in reducing that cost of raising these animals. And strategy that you can use, I showed the 5 day cedar sync protocol. It's being a protocol that's established. You get about 55 to 60% conception rate on those using that protocol with the cedar. We are developing this program without a cedar. you're probably going to have about 50% conception rate that protocol, 45 to 50% with that other protocol. So that can reduce about 17% of per pregnancy, dollars per heifer per pregnancy, sorry, in your heifers, which is when you put in economy scale, you're going to reduce a lot of in terms of cost for having these animals pregnant sooner. So with that, just want to thank my group here, the students that I had, grad students, research intern. Want to thank the PDP, right, or PDPW or PDP. So what do you are you officially did you officially change the name to PDP?
Yes, so we are still kind of known to some by as PDPW. It's just something
Okay.
that we've had for 30 years that we will always be recognized at in some way, shape, or form. But we are PDP for professional dairy producers because we like to welcome members from I think we have 34 or 36 different states. So that
Oh,
are
okay.
recognized and be a part of those groups as well.
So I would like to thank you for inviting me for this. This is my email, my lab website. So if you want to ask questions by email, feel free to send me an email. I hope I can answer most of the questions today.
So, JP, I know we're a little bit past time here, but are you okay with taking these last two questions that were written in?
Yeah, let's do this.
Okay, so I am going to read them out to you.
I
If
stopped
you need,
sharing here so we can have full screen.
perfect. So, let me know if I need to slow down or reread anything because these two are a little bit more lengthy, and I want to make sure that we get their message across. So, the first one here reads, "As we push for a heifer calf from a first-time breeding heifer, are we now dealing with a whole new animal? Have we tweaked with genetics so much and so fast, and that are we messing with longevity?"
Hmm. So can you repeat again? Let's see. Are we tweaking with genetics? Yeah, he's
Yep. So the last portion is, have we tweaked with genetics so much and so fast, and are we messing with longevity by doing sex semen on heifers younger?
well, and like I said, most producers are not using the I don't know how much that longevity will actually most of these cows are not going to stay in the herd for too long. Let's be honest here, right? It's not like how much can you really affect that longevity if you're um, I'm not sure if we are actually tweaking that much with longevity, to be honest. I'm not sure if that's correct. Um, like what is the average lactation in these farms are 2.4, right? 2.5 lactations, right? If I'm not sure if we are actually tweaking that much with longevity, doing that, in my opinion, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm
Next.
not sure if that's correct that statement, to be honest.
Well, and that's okay. And that's why we're asking it. It's one of those things where we're always, as dairy producers and, those involved in the industry, always asking questions to get opinions, get thoughts, and to spur up some discussion. So, this is another one of those longer questions here. I think I don't know if I should split up into two, but the first portion of this one reads, "For heifer rearing costs, have we looked at feed efficiency in relation to feed costs for the new heifers that are born from the heifers that were using sex semen? I hear more and more about the curse of the firstborn and the concept of them being smaller and taking more time to get them going."
Oh, I see. So I think that's a good question about if heifers coming from heifers are bad. Basically, I believe that's are worse than heifers coming from cows,
Yes,
right?
that's a much easier way to
Oh,
put it.
I think that's basically it. Yeah. And I'm not sure. It's kind of hard sometimes to understand exactly what the producer is trying to. And I believe that's what he's asking. And we actually asked this question some time ago, and there is a scientist in California in Canada that actually asked this question to are heifers coming. There are some aspects of that animal that actually, and I agree that we are probably in this case, I believe we're probably tweaking a little bit because you're probably going to have some differences in the animals that are coming from heifers than animals that are coming from cows, but still there are uh like what is the if you're using genomics, I believe you're going to be able to it, and that's enters in a little bit of something that's it's called epigenetics, and there is epigenetics that can tweak what are the genes that are expressed. Okay, and I believe there are some differences there, but I'm not sure yet how much that will affect our next generation. That it's probably something that it's not in my umbrella of studies, epigenetics right now, but I believe he's probably right. We're probably tweaking the next generation just by using heifers as our basically uterus, right? For the next generation. I'm not sure how much though, how much that will affect, because it's still the same animal, right? But some environmental, it's going to be environmental changes there during the gestation, basically, that will affect. So I believe you're going to have smaller animals probably comparing to cows, and I'm not sure smaller it's because heifers are probably going to have smaller calves comparing to cows, and maybe I'm not sure we are not changing too much after they calve though, right? So they're gonna have received pretty much the same management, right? Comparing to these animals that are having their from the cows. So I'm not sure how much that will affect. There's probably some effect to be honest, but I'm not sure if that's in the end, at the end, I'm not. Would you change? Would you breed cows to be your uterus and reduce your economic, like your financial return? That's the question, right? Because right now you're using genomics as selection, right? And of course, because the sex semen has a reduction in conception rate, you select your most fertile animals to be inseminated. So you're selecting heifers because you have a reduction in conception rates when you use sex semen or most people will use first lactation for heifers and first lactation and first and second service, which is the highest conception rate. So would you put beef semen on those animals and put sex semen on the less fertile animals? I'm not sure if that would be a good strategy, right? In terms of economic return, you have to think about the economic return, right? And that's in the end what matters for the producer. So that's why people are doing what they're doing, right? So if they're gonna be a little bit of a detrimental effect, then we have to see we're probably gonna see in the future some effects of the selection that we're doing. But right now, I'm not sure if we're having a lot of issues with that. I don't think we are having a lot of issues with that. It's probably going to be minimal the problems.
Well, I have to say, it's an interesting question that's brought up that really makes, as a producer, really makes me think about why am I doing what I'm doing? And is it
Yes,
working for me and in my management style? So I think that's really what it brings it back to is, you know, could there potentially be? Yes. But in the end, does the pros outweigh the cons from the sound of what I'm gathering from what we
exactly.
talked about?
You put it way better than me. Yeah.
Well,
So that's what they.
I had the privilege of being able to listen through and kind of disseminate what you're going for. So,
And I
but
think
I
that's
think
for
it's an
everything,
interesting
right? The
thought.
pros and for longevity, the same thing are the pros for selecting for longevity instead of fertility and production better. I'm not sure because how long you're going to keep that cow for, and if you're selecting for fertility um, and already taking consideration the other factors like milk production, fertility, and different other different traits, you would actually already account for that, for some of the longevity. That longevity is a multi-trait, so it will take in consideration some other factors as well. So
Yeah, I think really kind of what it sounds like is, and it goes back to kind of what the beauty of the dairy sector is that what works for some people doesn't work for others. Um, and I want,
exactly.
and I
And I
wanted,
respect that, by the
yeah,
way. There are several different ways of doing of daring, right? Of doing your making sure the management actually will fit your style or your what works for you, right? It doesn't work sometimes for others, and I respect that for sure. And some people uh, have like a more they put on the importance some other things like longevity. Some producers are really proud of having cows for longer period of times, older cows compared to the other producers. In terms of but you have to account for that economic return, right? Making sure if you're doing that will be the most profitable way and will keep your farmer for long, right?
yeah.
Being profitable and sustainable. And if you think about Saxton beef semen, in my opinion, that's the best way to sell how sustainable the dairy industry is. Like the dairy industry is producing not only the milk but also the beef for us. So it's amazing this story actually of the beef semen that we're using, the beef on dairy. It's really incredible story. I think this should be disseminated better, to be honest.
I think that is incredibly true, and I think it's a great way to end where we're at here today. To be cognizant of our time for you, JP, as well, because I appreciate the discussion, and not only that, but also all the information that you have been able to bring forward and really help piecemeal together what it means and what we should be looking at when it comes to our heifers. So, thank you so much for your time here this afternoon.
Thank you, Amber. Appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for listening to us.
I cannot say that better. Thank you for all those who are listening, types in your questions, as well as once again, thank you to our sponsor for the Dairy Signal currently, which is DMI. To learn more, make sure to head over to their website. But for now, thank you for joining us here, and we'll see you here on Thursday on the Dairy Signal. Bye now.